And of course, at the same time as the Boston bombings, Iraq saw almost its deadliest week in 5 years. I mean, April was the deadliest month in a long time. Atrocities going on every day, suicide bombings. Yet, seeing the zeroing in on this tragedy when at the same time our foreign policy is causing these effects in Iraq.
Well, I mentioned Magna Carta, which is 800 years, but there's also something else which is about 70 years. It's called the Nuremberg Tribunal, which is the foundation, it's part of the foundation of modern international law. And it defines aggression as the supreme international crime, differing from other war crimes in that it encompasses all of the evil that follows. Now, the U.S.-British invasion of Iraq was a textbook example of aggression, not a question about it, which means that we're responsible for all the evil that follows, like the bombings. Serious conflict arose. It's now spread all over the region. In fact, the region is being torn to shreds by this conflict. Well, that's part of the evil that follows.
The media's lack of coverage with everything that you're speaking on, and I know that America runs on this nationalism and American exceptionalism, but is America's severe lack of empathy unique? Or do we see this in every country? And are we just growing up in America and we just, are isolated with our own viewpoint?
I think it's true of every great power that I can think of. Britain was the same, France was the same, Germany was, unless a country's defeated. Like when Germany was defeated after the Second World War, it was compelled to pay attention to the atrocities that it had carried out, but others don't. In fact, there was an interesting case this morning, which I was glad to see. In fact, it was finally, there are trials going on in Guatemala of Rios Montt, who is basically responsible for the virtually genocidal destruction of the Mayans. And the U.S. was involved in it every step of the way. Finally, this morning, there's an article about it, saying that something was missing from the trials, the U.S. role, which is good. I'm glad to see the article.
Of course, Reagan, the School of Americas. Do you think that we'll ever see white war criminals from imperialist nations stand trial in the same way Rios Montt did?
It's almost impossible. Take a look at the ICC, International Criminal Court. Black Africans or other people the West doesn't like. Bush and Blair ought to be right up there. There's no recent crime worse than the invasion of Iraq. Obama ought to be there for the terror war. But that's just inconceivable. In fact, there's legislation in the United States, which in Europe is called the Netherlands Invasion Act, a congressional legislation signed by the president, which authorizes the president to use force to rescue any American brought to The Hague for trial. I mean, this is mind-boggling.
Speaking of the drone wars, I can't help but think of John Bellinger, the chief architect of the drone policy, who was speaking to a think tank recently, and he said that Obama's ramped up the drone killings simply to avoid the bad press of Gitmo, of capturing suspects alive and trying them at Gitmo. When you hear things